including lakes and ponds, trees, shrubs, and plants. Learn more about Canada's energy at oilsandstoday.ca.
I, Timothy F. Geithner.
I, Timothy F. Geithner.
When Timothy Geithner was offered the position of Treasury Secretary in 2008, he understood it would not win him any popularity contests.
Did you ever sort of look at it as a no-win job?
Oh, I was pretty confident it was a no-win job.
Geithner would help navigate the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. To some, he became a hero who saved the economy. To others, the villain who rewarded the banks.
I'm curious, what would you say your worst day in the financial crisis was?
I had a lot of bad days, yeah. I had a lot of terrifying days.
For 6 years.
How would you describe this institution?
Oh, it's the national treasure, I think. It's
First as head of the New York Federal Reserve, then as Treasury Secretary, Geithner would confront a series of rolling crises: the rescue of Bear Stearns, the collapse of Lehman Brothers, a spreading panic in the stock markets.
Did you feel like you were, the kid at the dike plugging your finger in?
I tell the story that I went to see Paul Volcker on Saturday of the Bear Stearns weekend, and I walked into his apartment because I wanted to tell him where we were, and he said, "How's your finger?" And I didn't know what he was talking about, but he was referring to the finger of the dike.
Yeah. In his first television interview since leaving the Treasury last year, Geithner acknowledged he'd not always made his case well.
There were a lot of communications issues.
Issues is a nice way to put it.
What would you call them?
How about failures?
Yeah.
In his new memoir, Stress Test, he tries to set the record straight.
I think a lot of people still feel that the banks should have been made to pay in some way,
yeah.
Either in terms of restructuring, less executive compensation. In some cases, some people should have gone to jail.
I think everybody feels that way.
Do you feel that way?
And I think it's a totally understandable perception, but it's a little...
Do you feel that way?
Well, I feel like it's a complicated thing. There was a terrible amount of abuse and fraud and bad behavior and damaging and dumb things that people did in this crisis. And I think Americans definitely deserved a stronger enforcement response.
Yeah,
and
but I want to know what you think. I mean,
and I think
you saw this up close better than anybody. Does it surprise you nobody went to jail?
It doesn't surprise me no one went to jail. It doesn't surprise me.
What may have been immoral or unethical, he says, was not illegal. Geithner's often been accused of being too cozy with Wall Street. A myth even developed that he'd once worked for Goldman Sachs.
And I practice law, and you've been in banking. Is a deal
Actually, I've never actually been in banking. I've only been in public service.
Well, a long time ago.
Yeah.
A long time.
Never.
Investment banking, I meant.
Never investment banking.
In fact, a career public servant, he'd taken only a single economics class at Dartmouth.
What were you thinking you were going to be when you grew up?
I didn't know what I was going to be.
Treasury Secretary wasn't on the list.
There's no risk of that growing up, yeah.
Geithner, whose father worked for the Ford Foundation and USAID, had an itinerant childhood, living in India, Africa, and Thailand. Eager to follow his father's path in public service, he joined the Treasury Department, where in the 90s he'd monitor financial crises overseas.
It was a great exposure to all the mistakes people can make, how fragile things are, how hard it is once confidence breaks to put it back together again, how devastating the damage is.
So as head of the New York Fed, when Lehman Brothers was on the brink of collapse in September 2008, he understood what was at stake.
We brought the leaders of Wall Street together in a room right there.
Right.
And we basically kept them there for 3 days.
Working with then Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson, Geithner tried to find a buyer for Lehman, but failed.
When you realized you couldn't save Lehman, what were you thinking?
Oh, I thought it was going to be terrible. And of course it was terrible. It was worse than we imagined, though.
The next day, the stock market plunged 500 points.
There is a perception, I know, on Wall Street that You found a way to save Bear Stearns. You found a way to save AIG.
I know there is.
You could have found a way to save Lehman.
Yeah. In the Lehman case, there was no willing buyer in the end, although we worked very hard. We worked really, really hard to try to make it happen.
That fall, when President-elect Obama approached Geithner about succeeding Paulson as Treasury Secretary, his wife, Carol, who he met at Dartmouth, strongly opposed it.
I really had a sense of dread about that.
Was it worse than you thought it would be, or?
It was worse than I could have imagined it would be.
What was the hardest part?
Having a person that you really love and care about being beaten up and criticized when they are doing their best to solve a problem that had no easy answers.
You gave lame excuses then. I believe you're giving the committee lame excuses now. And
Geithner would become a lightning rod, and TARP, the $700 billion rescue package he helped push through to save the banks, would take much of the heat. Banks have paid back the loans with interest, but the cheap money they were lent allowed them to reap billions in profits as homeowners struggled.
These banks were still taking huge bonuses.
Oh, it was terrible. That was terrible. It was outrageous and killed us.
People are rightly outraged about these particular bonuses.
Did you get on the phone and say, guys, I'm trying to help you survive and you're killing me?
We didn't, and I said that. I said exactly that. I used exactly those words. I said, this is going to kill us. I used some other words, too.
But Geithner argues that even though it appeared the arsonists were being rewarded, the banking system had to be secured.
You're basically saying homeowners were collateral damage.
No, I'm saying in a financial panic, there is enormous collateral damage. They're deeply unfair and tragic in that context. So the first imperative is to make sure you make the system stable, not because you care about the banks or you want to protect them from their mistakes, but because if you let the lights go out, the system will collapse around them.
After a year at home in Larchmont, New York, writing his book, last month Geithner, now 52, started a new job as president of the private equity firm Warburg Pincus.
Some people could look at it and say, well, he's going to Wall Street.
Yeah, they could say, and I was really, actually, I thought about that a lot. I was really worried about that perception. So I did not go and did not want to go, was not willing to go to an institution that we had regulated or that we had rescued for exactly that reason.
His role in the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression will be debated for decades. History will judge Timothy Geithner, and he knows it.
Do you worry about defending your legacy?
I don't think there's any hope for my legacy. The only thing you can do.
You don't think there's any hope of defending your legacy?
I don't know. It's just not something you can worry about. Again, I feel very confident that we made some very good choices and the best choices we could in the circumstances at the time. And I'm at peace with those decisions, even though I carry with me just all the burdens of the disappointment and the scars of the damage.